So welcome everyone to our April virtual meetup of Agile Boston. Nice to see everyone again who has the camera on. Julie and Jim and Ann, welcome. I see some old friends, Linda, Michael, and I see some new folks too. And we're really happy that you're all here today. Angela, David, welcome. So today, as you know, we have Dan Mezick going to be presenting, and I just wanted to say, I wanted to thank Dan. So when we were doing Give Thanks to Scrum back in November, what typically happens is we try our best to keep things on time, from one meeting to the next or one presentation to the next. But we were lagging about 15 minutes behind by the time we got to Dan's talk, which was, I think, right before lunch, if I'm not mistaken. So Dan took one on the chin for us, and he goes, I'll curtail my talk to whatever time we have so we can get back on track. And of course, that was what Dan does. He always does those kind of things to help us out. But I really loved his talk, and even in the 20 minutes, I was like, Dan, that had more punch than I get in an hour presentation. So I asked Dan if he can come back and sort of give us the whole enchilada here on what he was going to talk about at Give Thanks for Scrum. So Dan graciously accepted. So I'm going to hand it off to Dan. Dan, thank you for being here.
Greetings to all of you. I'm so happy to be with you all. As more people come in, welcome to each of you. This talk is about empiricism and how to bring that idea of empirical experiments to people who get to decide, namely executives and other decision makers. So that's what this is about. And I have to tell you right up front that I have struggled with this throughout my career. And I've learned some things along the way, right? Like so many things that I'll get into in the talk. But I guess what I mean to say is, if you come in with jargon, if you come in with complexity and uncertainty and complexity science and emergence, that's a total turnoff, and you're not going to get anywhere with them, right? What they really want to know is, when will I get some results that are tangible and measured, right? So I am going to explain in this talk how you can do that in a way that allows you to do so without compromising your understanding of Scrum, your understanding of Agile, and how to get the deal. Whether you're an in-house coach or an external coach, how to get started right away with teams and put some points on the board with Scrum, right? So my summary message on this talk is that we have the goods. We actually have the goods. So when a project is late, when a project is in crisis, when a project is drifting, we actually can come in and straighten that out. And I want to encourage each one of you to have total confidence that that's true, right? And I'm going to show you some techniques and tools for communication to get that across, to display confidence, to get the results, and to build credibility so you can be a trusted advisor, regardless of your current role as an employee or an external coach. You can rise to the level of someone who people come to when they need advice, right? When decision makers need advice, they come to you because of the things that you did back in whatever time it was that you applied these techniques, right? So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to also kind of come in and out of screen sharing because there's data that shows that more than 90 seconds of screen sharing is incredibly boring. And there's a sort of a cliff, there's an exponential decay in attention when the screen share is up for more than 90 seconds, right? So I'll be coming in and out of the screen share, okay? All right. So Joe, could you set me up to do screen share? Because I'm not able to right now. And just give me okay, good. All right. So let's get into it. We have an hour, right? That's our story. So this is, can you see that okay? Yeah? All right, so this is the first slide. Basically, this is the talk I gave at Give Thanks for Scrum last year in November, and it's the talk that Joe just described, right? So what are we going to do? This is how you can reach me, and of course, you'll get these slides. So if you want to reach me, you can use the slides to get to me. You can get me on LinkedIn. You can get me on Twitter if you look, Daniel Mezick. I didn't put that here, I don't think, but that's my email if you're interested in sending me an email about anything. Okay. All right, so what's the learning objective for this session? Ideally, we will learn how to describe the benefits in this decision maker language. How we can use an empirical approach, how can we use emergence, how can we use complexity to get and address it to get the job done, and how can we achieve the business positive results that will build our credibility as coaches and as Scrum Masters, right? That's the actual goal. So to learn how to describe the benefits and then to deliver the goods. How does that sound as a goal for the next half hour or so? Fair? Is there anything that someone wants to add to that? Something you came here to get that I need to know about so I can deliver it? So something else I can deliver here? Basically okay? Yeah?
Yep.
Right.
And Daniel, I'm looking for some of those empirical methods, like what empiricism is a great word, but what are we being empirical about is what I'm curious and looking forward to hearing.
Yeah, let me preface this whole thing by saying that engineers and executives have two things in common. They don't like to be wrong, and they get paid for right answers. Okay, so these two dynamics come into play when you deal with engineers and executives. Executives and engineers don't want to hear about how we're gonna, how the solution's going to emerge. That sounds like uncertainty to me. Okay, they don't want to hear about how we're going to do experiments. That sounds expensive to me. So what we have to do is somehow sanitize these terms in a way that flips them from being liabilities to being assets, right? So the primary tool you're going to use is confidence. Confidence that you have the goods to turn this project around using empirical approaches like Scrum, okay? So let's get into this.
So just one sec, just a quick question. I'm sort of building on that. In addition to confidence, my executives will want numbers.
Of course.
How many weeks, how many cycles,
Of course.
level of quality, etc.
Yes.
So just
Thank
kind
you.
of
Yes, I'm going there. I'm totally going there with you.
thank you.
Yeah, with you and for you. Okay. So that's it. Learn how to describe the benefits in lingo that lands, that can be received, that's not threatening, that sounds good, and how to then deliver the goods, right? How to achieve the implementation results that we're looking for, right? Explain complexity in simple terms. And you're going to explain this with the minimum number of words and the minimum amount of time and the maximum impact. And I've been doing this for many, many years. And I've gained confidence over the years. And what I've found actually works, this is about what actually works, okay, not some theoretical thing, but what actually works, is to use the Stacy graph, which has, this idea of mapping complexity far from certainty on the horizontal axis, far from agreement on the vertical axis. Perfect agreement, perfect certainty is the yellow area, simplicity, right? Doing your dishes, paying your taxes, putting an envelope in the mail. Yeah, those things are simple. There's no debate. The knowledge is 100%. We're not guessing whatsoever. That's simple, right? Next step, next layer is the complicated space. In the complicated space, we're further away from agreement. We're further away from certainty. We're in the blue area. This is the area of like traditional project management, stuff like that. And then up here in the orange area and the red area, we're into this complex orange space, which could actually encompass some chaos in the red area where we're very, very far away from certainty, very, very far away from agreement. We define that as chaos. Okay, go ahead, Julie. Yeah.
So this may be really basic, but what are you talking about in this case as agreement? Like agreement among whom about?
Agreement on how, I would say that far from agreement on how we're going to do something, and then far from certainty on what we're actually building.
Okay.
Right? So you could think of it like that. But what I'm getting at here with this graph, there's other graphs that will not be named that exist that are out there. They themselves are quite complex, and you will get lost in translation if you use them. Okay, so I like the simple Stacy graph where, you know, perfect agreement and perfect certainty is in this lower left-hand area, usually depicted in yellow, and then total chaos, far from certainty, far from agreement, is way up here in the upper right-hand area. Okay, and then the next thing that I do is I ask a series of questions to determine how much complexity is present, and I get the executive to agree that that's true. So I ask like about a dozen questions, like, are there more than 4 stakeholders? Is the project already late? Has the project never been done before? You know, this product that we're building, has it never been built before? Is this the first time? Does the team have more than 9 members? You know, is the budget still under discussion? All these kinds of questions to determine how much complexity do we have. So I add up the yes answers, and of course I'll send you this document like I said in the advertisement for this talk. I'll send you those questions, and you can use them. Okay, and we get them to agree that the project under consideration is at the edge of the orange area where it's going into the red. Like it's if it's not in the chaotic space, it's close to it, right? It's up there somewhere along that upper line. Okay, so that's the first thing that I do. Is a picture's worth 1,000 words. I don't get into a lot of jargon. I just discuss simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. That's it. And I use a diagram. Who has questions on this? I do this in 5 minutes with the decision maker. Their time is scarce and valuable, you know? They don't have a lot of time. They want you to get to the point. This will get you to get to the point with this. Anybody have a question on this? Okay, no questions. So then the next thing that I do is I run down those 12 questions, which you'll get in the document. And you know, if more than 8 of them are yeses, we're in the complex space. We get them to agree on that. All right, if we're in the complex space, the next step is, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
The next step is to, you know, like I said, confirm that the project qualifies for the empirical approach. So I'm going to link empirical, learn by doing, with complex problems, right? If you want to solve a complex problem, you've got to learn by doing. You're not going to solve it with an ABC approach. I associate the ABC approach with project management, and I associate empiricism with Scrum. I explained that the goal is to reduce the complexity of the project over time. So if we were to go back one slide, our goal is to move it from the red area down to the blue area. That's what we're going to do when we apply Scrum, is we're going to wrestle the project down from the red space to the lower left into the blue area. Okay, that's the goal. In other words, our goal is to reduce complexity. I communicate that to the executives. Okay, so we have more certainty and more agreement over time as we apply the empirical approach. In other words, we're going to make life more simple right away. Okay. Now, the next thing is empiricism from the Scrum point of view. I don't even mention Scrum. I mention transparency, inspection, and adaptation, which are discussed on page 1 of the Scrum Guide. But I don't necessarily even mention Scrum at this point. I just say, look, if we're going to take the empirical approach, which is going to solve the complex problem, which we just agreed we have, We need the data, all the information to be available to everybody. We need to do frequent inspections, and then we need to adapt off of the learning we get out of those inspections. So the primary tool we're going to use is frequent inspection. And transparency is foundational to getting that done, because what we're inspecting is the actual results. So the results can't be hidden or buried into some file on some network server. It has to be readily accessible to everyone, easy to see. How are we going to do this? We're going to use iterations, 1 week or 2 week. I like 1 week iterations for the crisis project, to tell you the truth. Gets everyone moving. There's no dilly-dallying. And we get to the end of an iteration right away, and we get our first inspection. Boom. I like the 1 week sprint for that reason, especially for teams that are new to Scrum. Because 2 weeks to me is just a little too long. Second thing is the daily updates. What are the daily updates in Scrum? It's the daily Scrum. So the concept is a daily update, not the Scrum stand-up, right? So no matter how we achieve the daily update, it's good. It doesn't have to be like core Scrum. What do I mean by this? You know, people are now working all over the world. They're in different time zones, and it's hard to get people together for one meeting. If you have people in Europe, India, and the United States, the only time when you can get together is the morning hours between about 8 o'clock and 9:30. Okay, so all the meetings get crowded into that space. So I've been using a daily log on Teams. When you start your day, you answer the basic daily Scrum questions. And then as everyone logs on around the world, they do that. And then everyone can see everyone else's daily Scrum. And that's a cheaper way. It's an asynchronous approach as opposed to a synchronous approach. And I might sound like a heretic, but I'm telling you this actually works. And it's an easy, low-cost entry point for teams that are new to Scrum. It reduces the overhead of Scrum by just saying, look, it takes 5 minutes a day. Just go to the log and be detailed in your answers. Okay. And then the other thing is frequent and periodic demonstrations of progress. Well, that's the sprint review at the end of the week. Okay, so I explain empiricism as transparency, inspection, and adaptation, and then I discuss these Scrum techniques without saying Scrum. Anybody have any questions on this whole idea so far? I've only spent 10 minutes at this point. Okay? Not a 1 week class, not a 1 day thing, not even a 1 hour thing. Just down 10, 15 minutes, get a few yeses out of the decision maker. That's what we're aiming at. We want them to say yes. Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in a vote for the 1 week thing. I found I couldn't get this stuff to fly in those settings with longer than that. And the other thing that I found is that we used to do this years ago in chat with what the heck was it called? IRC. That for the overnight gang, we just have a hashtag, some hashtag sequence that's easy to search for things that are really hot items. And that way for the overnight, you do the stand up, but we use like triple hash or something like that. It's like, make sure you know about this for the next day. And that way people come in and they easily get a quick recap of the hot stuff.
Very good. Yeah, so you're tagging it with a hot tag.
Yep.
I like that. Yeah, the 1 week sprint for new teams. Oddly, I find it actually works. It's actually comical when you get started because they kind of come kicking and screaming to it. But then after the first iteration, they start to see, whoa, this is actually working. By the second iteration, they're like, whoa, we're getting results. And then you make believers out of them. Okay.
Or they discover that, wow, their process is so messed up they can't get anything done in a week.
That happens too. Yeah. But Scrum has a technique to solve for that, right? Okay.
It certainly helps decrease the work in progress. You know, when we go to 1 week scrums, nobody can focus on something due 2 weeks from now.
Right. Now here's the offer you're going to make. Okay. So you Get agreement that we have a complex project. That's a project for an empirical approach. We get agreement that the empirical approach is frequent inspection, adaptation, transparency, right? We're leading them towards Scrum here. We haven't even mentioned Scrum. And then we make the offer. Consequences is misspelled here. Please forgive me for that. The offer is to promise to deliver the goods in 2 iterations. So if you're doing a 2-week sprint, 1 month. If you're doing a 1-week sprint, 2 weeks. You throw the gauntlet down and you say, here's how I say it. Ready? I say it like this. If I can't help you produce better results in 2 iterations, then I expect that you will politely and courteously lead me to the exit door and bid me farewell. In other words, I'm guaranteeing that we're going to get results in 2 iterations. Okay? Yeah. That clicks with decision makers. So
How do you
go ahead. Yeah.
how do you frame the nuance of what results you're gonna get in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
executives here 2 weeks, they think I'm gonna solve everything in that time.
Better quality, happier stakeholders, deliveries that are closer to what the sponsors actually want, quicker delivery, all these things.
So essentially what we're saying is we're gonna see progress,
That's
observable
correct.
progress. in 2
I
iterations.
will deliver progress in 2 iterations, subject to certain requirements, right? Like they have to agree to do these things, otherwise you can't deliver the goods, right? So people have to agree. So for example, stakeholders have to agree to show up at the sprint review once a week, right? Team members have to agree to some kind of daily update, either on a log or in a meeting. If we can't get those things, we can't deliver the goods. But by holding out the promise of what we can create, now we can walk it back. Okay, what's it going to take? And then we tell them, and then they say, okay. All right. So I'm sharing the screen here. How much time do we have left? Let's see. Okay, we're about halfway through. All right, so now we're going to discuss experimentation. And experimentation is actually a kind of a deep subject. And let's get into that a little bit, because we're going to end up doing some experiments. And not all experiments are created equal. So we're going to place highly leveraged bets on selected experiments. How will we select these experiments? Because we need to get validated learning that we're moving in the right direction. We need to take a shot in a certain direction and on a hypothesis, and then deliver something, right? So how do we do this? Well, here's a table. The total potential benefit of the experiment, let's say that this is in some multiple of dollars, right? 50, 75, 100, 200. If we were to just look at this column, we would say that this is the best experiment, the one that delivers the biggest benefit. But that's not necessarily true, because we have to temper the value with the cost. If the cost of attaining it exceeds the value of having it, it's a stupid idea, right? The cost can't exceed the benefit. That would be dumb, right? So we need to estimate the benefit. We need to estimate the cost. Then we need to divide the benefit by the cost to create the bang for the buck. And that's what this third column is, the benefit cost ratio. This is the one with the highest benefit to cost. The second one, its ratio is 10.71. All the others are less than half of that. This is the one to do right here. The one with a benefit of 75 and a cost of 7. All right. Now this raises all kinds of conversations. Well, how do we estimate the benefit? How do we estimate the cost? What are the components of the cost? What are the components of the benefit calculation? Right? These are the right conversations to be having. Okay? So, who has a comment on this, a question or a concern? Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, a comical thing I'm sure you see all the time too is, well, we have no way to come up with anything that looks like numbers for these. And it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. So maybe that's the first problem to solve, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Okay, so there's an excellent book like by Don Reinerson called How to Create Products in Half the Time or something like that, where he discusses the cost of delay. The cost of delay is an important conversation about the benefit, about the value, okay? And also the cost. So we have to start talking about what are the components of the benefit estimation? What are the components of the cost calculation? And I want to show you that now, okay? Here's some of the components of the cost. Time. The expiration of time. Time is a wasting, asset. It goes away. Money. There's a finite amount of money. Attention. We can't pay attention to everything. The time, money, and attention, those are all costs. And then there's opportunity related costs like the cost of delay, which I can't get into now. Now, can you think of any other aspects of the total costs involved in conducting an experiment? And Jim Berquist and Darren, feel free to jump in. Jim, first, you have your hand up. What's your question?
It's actually it's a question about I like the Stacy diagram, and I like the whole approach of, it's all about, low risk fast cycle experimentation.
Right.
The interesting thing is that there's a lot of crises where the solution is actually really well understood. So the example I like to give is a fire on a submarine, right? The military knows how to deal with fires on the submarine. They practice it, that they've dealt with it a lot. They know exactly what to do. And so in that case, you don't even need a lot of experimentation, but this top-down approach actually really works well.
Yep.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have challenges like, we're at the top of our S curve and we need to create a new growth engine. And that's where you get, that would be more in the chaos area because certainty is really low. And an agreement, usually nobody agrees on it unless you just have a yes sir culture type thing going on. So I think the challenge or the promise of Agile versus the limitations of Scrum may be something that I struggle a little bit with, which is that, Agile was supposed to be self-organizing teams. And so what you see in startups is you have kind of a management focus on we're gonna low risk fast cycle experiment on the things that the managers think is what's going to work. But alongside of that, when you work in like one of these really nimble startups, you've got every employee also running all these kind of unofficial skunkworks projects that are, kind of too early to gain official approval or even be shared in the company. So you've got this kind of swarm intelligence going on. And, Scrum, I think in particular, is set up where the experimentation can only happen at the team level. And that is actually really limiting. And so I think the bigger the crisis, the more where the less certainty there is, you actually need more than what maybe Scrum delivers in a lot of cases, where you need to get closer to this Scrum intelligence, because having a whole team go through week-long or low risk fast cycle experimentation is nothing like having 20 people just trying all kinds of crazy ideas alongside of what is officially kind of being worked on. So
thank you for those comments. And they're all very valuable insights that you offered there. Probably the most valuable insight for me is the idea that the more complex things are, the more you have to open up the agency, okay, and get away from the central planning, right? So I'm agreeing with you. The problem. Go ahead.
Why is it that the more complex things are, the more you need to get away from central planning? I'm not hearing that. What I'm hearing is a lot of risk associated with that decentralized planning and execution that doesn't go back into the calculations.
Yeah, let me just say that for the purposes of this talk, the reason why I brought up experimentation is because it's a central technique or component of the empirical approach. Okay, so going back to what Jim said, here's what I found is true. If you do 1 week sprints, if you do an inspired by Scrum approach, and you loosen up the Scrum a little bit, okay, you're going to get that agency that you're looking for at individual and team level. And I wanted to say one more thing about this. When we say self-organizing teams, we really mean self-managing teams. And if we're self-managing, what is it that we're managing? It's the how decisions. That's what self-organization is. It's teams self-managing their decisions about how. Okay, so this is how, Jim, you're shaking your head. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm just too focused on complexity theory and that kind of thing. But really, self-organizing is kind of like what I think you have spent a lot of your career doing, Daniel, which is this kind of the law of 2 feet, like the open space stuff, which is that it's not just autonomy, right? Like it's self-organization, self-management, if you want to call it that, but I like self-organization better, is not just autonomy within, okay, here's what we're doing, and now you've got autonomy to do that. I really think that it's the law of 2 feet, that if we're missing something, then you actually have the freedom to go kind of experiment outside of, kind of the bounds of what you're doing. So maybe you're saying that because like everything I know about you leads me to believe that you're a self-organizing type person, champion, advocate. But I guess I think that it's not just how, it's actually what. Like if you don't give people the freedom to do what, which is what startups do and what big companies don't,
Right.
then you don't get nimble. You get, kind of top down. You can have fast cycle experimentation, but it's still limiting. That I can't go work on something that I think that I see that nobody else kind of sees. And in a crisis situation where there's a lot of uncertainty, you actually need more of that, I think, is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I want to tell you the language that I use with executives, and then I'm going to take Joel's question, okay? When I discuss self-organizing, I describe it as self-management to executives. That's something they can understand. If we talk about self-organizing, we might be talking about fish or birds, murmuration, schools, and so forth. But actually, what we really want is results from people and teams in organizations. So I say self-management. And then when I discuss what is it they're managing, I discuss how they have decision autonomy. And they're actually managing who decides how the decisions get made, both at the what level and the how level. So with that, let's go to Joel. Joel, what do you got?
Yeah, I guess, Jim, this may be a much larger discussion. Happy to talk offline about it. But I don't really see this as oppositional to Scrum in any fashion, because there's nothing that keeps you from saying, I'm going to allocate some resource to doing experimentation. Central planning doesn't actually prevent that, although the way people implement it often does, where people leave no time for anything but the feature factory stuff. But you could easily say, hey, we're going to take 30% of the sprint, and the team or teams are going to go nuts on figuring stuff out. At least, from my view, that's the Scrum discussion to me is kind of a orthogonal to the point of allowing people to go do what they need to do.
I agree.
Any thoughts? Yeah. Okay.
And more so, the central planning allows you to set up guardrails that are needed for experimentation in a capitalist, mid-sized or larger company.
Of course, you can't do
You need
experiments.
to be clear about what you're doing, and you need to be clear about how to manage the risks. around.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
If I could add one last little thing in here, I've actually run into several cases where teams are left to their own devices to, hey, do the things that make sense to you to do. Please do some experimentation. And they were driving themselves towards feature factory. And by having the planning structure say, hey, like, let's relearn this, take some amount of your sprint, go do experimentation. That so the nudge from the center actually was helpful, as long as it's not, a crowbar.
No. Okay, now Darren, you've been patient, you've been waiting. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, thanks, Dan. I was going to say, sort of combining a lot of what we just talked about, you have to talk two ways. When you talk up, yes, it's dollars, it's cost of your experiments, but you really have to advocate that it's trying to minimize the risk. And then same way going down into the team is that the experiment isn't so much about cost, but our outcome that we're trying in this experiment is how do we reduce the risk? And I think being the man in the middle, being the person in the middle, you have to bring back to your stakeholders, your execs, more than just cost, because they're always going to choose the cheapest cost, but they're not realizing that that might be the highest risk path. So
yes, that's a great point. And risk is a complex subject. We're going to get into that in the next slide.
Yep.
So thank you for bringing this up. This is actually a fantastic kind of segue as we move along. And sorry if I'm going a little at a brisk pace here, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk during and after, okay? All right, so, the components of cost, there they are. And then the components of benefits. And we want to try to normalize everything to dollars. And here's some of those categories. The total implied learning that we will harvest from this experiment. What do we expect to learn? What's the volume of learning we expect? What's the amount of time saved that would reduce the cost of delay by doing this experiment to get what we would call in lean startup lingo, validated learning, right? That would allow us to go more confidently forward. And then what about the total implied increase in the quality of future decisions because of the knowledge that this experiment will yield? We can use that knowledge to increase the quality of future decisions based on more certainty, based on more know-how, based on more data that's generated by the experiment, right? So this is another benefit. And then, Darren just discussed risk. We get better at assessing risk by doing experiments, by doing small probes, by doing small, investigations. So my question is, what other benefits can be realized from an experiment? Did I get all of the benefits, or are there others besides these?
Risk should be on both costs and benefits side from my perspective.
Okay, that's fair. So risk should be listed on the cost side as well.
Yes. Yes,
As
there
part of
are
the
there are
assessment.
costs of options associated.
Yes. Okay, very
with the
good.
risk.
Others?
I think another one I would want to bring is a reduced future effort. The whole technical debt problem of that if you're not driving down the technical debt, sure, it short term looks good, but then long term, everything slows down.
Yes.
I'll add from the team perspective, confidence, right? If people start to believe in the path that you're pursuing, the outcome of the experiment, they're more inclined to join in and contribute. Whereas getting over that hurdle sometimes takes away from the outcome.
That's good. Yeah,
Yeah,
more certainty, less uncertainty.
Call it buy-in for executives. They don't like the word confidence, but it comes from the
What?
ranks.
What was that?
Call it buy-in for executives. They don't love the word confidence when it comes from the ranks.
Okay. Or confidence or
Buy-in,
buying.
yeah. We're increasing buy-in in the solution.
Okay.
But I
Okay.
guess you've got to keep in mind that you're also talking to the team, and the team really doesn't care about the cost and their confidence. They want to be successful. They don't want to spend their time throwing things away.
Everyone, this is a belief that I carry around. So did you ever look at someone and say, what are the stories that they're telling themselves? What is their behavior telling me about, like, what's their inner narrative, right? You might do that about me. You might look at me and go, what is that guy telling himself? Like, what stories is he telling himself? Here's a story I tell myself. Everyone's a junkie for progress. Progress is associated with like well-being, good mental health. Lack of progress is associated with illness, depression. We're all junkies for progress. So I'm a big fan of anything that promotes progress. So that's the story I'm telling myself. Everyone's a junkie for progress. And I've very seldom been proven wrong with that assumption. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, well, I would add to that, and this is hard to measure, but I believe in the force of momentum, breaking inertia, getting going. You can't overestimate that.
Movement. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Totally. Okay, so we're getting into like danger zone with time. So I'm gonna go back to the share screen and I'm gonna share it and I'm gonna go to the next slide. Okay. All right, here we go. Now let's discuss risk. This is something that Darren brought up. Risk in the dictionary is the possibility of loss of, time, money, attention, vitality, health, whatever. And it's also the element or course involving uncertain danger. So danger of some kind, hazard. This is what risk actually is. So it's a possibility of loss. This is something that I've learned from being an entrepreneur and building various software projects. The total risk of building something is the estimated total cost of what it costs to find out if you are wrong in your assumptions. That's the risk. So for example, I'm currently building something with a couple of startup partners, and we're all investing in some software. Our total risk is the total investment that we have to make to get it to the point where we can show it to users and validate our assumptions. Right? So it turns out to be about, a little over, 30,000 to find out. That's the total risk of this software project. We're going to put it in front of people, and if they tell us our baby is ugly, then we're going to stop. And it cost us 30,000 bucks to get that answer. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So
Is the reputational risk on top of?
Well, this is there's also reputational risk, but this is just the dollar cost risk. But we could also add reputational risk and normalize it to dollars, right? And that would raise the total number, right? Because if we give birth to this thing and it's ugly and people tell us it's ugly, then obviously, our reputation suffers, right? So you're right about that. But the concept is, start thinking, what is the total cost to get to the place where we can find out if we're wrong or right? That's the dollar cost, and that's the time cost. So you can estimate the time and the money cost, risk in time and money. It's the total time and money it takes to be able to find out if you're right or you're wrong. Who's got an idea about this?
Do you take into account the risks of project itself?
No, just the cost of funding it. Assuming things go perfectly.
Okay,
It's an estimate, right?
maybe an example will help. Say if I'm evaluating two options, one of them consists keeping the data on site and another consists getting the data out in the cloud. The risks of those two options, the risk of data loss in those two options are different. And the costs to prevent data loss is different. Do I take that into the calculations or not?
Yeah, this is a little outside the scope of the where we're going, the amount of time we have, but where you're definitely raising the right issues. The main thing that we need to do is we need to assess the risk, like Darren said.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm giving you a basic kind of heuristic or rule
No.
of thumb for that, which is how much time and money does it take for us to get to the point where we can find out if we're wrong or right? That's the risk size, generally speaking. Okay.
Dan, do you think you also have to take a moment and capture what's the knowns and unknowns of the outcome?
Sure.
So you're basically measuring, investment, is it good if we users like it, but you might get that far only to realize that, someone already has a patent on that workflow and now it's gone, after that. So I think it really helps to, and as you're hitting, calling out what questions you need to ask and get those out there. But
Yeah.
you got to hit what are your knowns and unknowns as well.
Yes.
Assumptions.
Yes. My rule of thumb here is raising all those questions, right? So if you start with this as your definition of risk, you're not going to go too far away from where you need to be. Okay. All right. Now let's go to the conclusions here. The conclusions for this talk. Number one, many initiatives that are assumed to be simple are actually complicated and complex. And I'm advocating for the use of a simple survey in the Stacy graph to communicate with executives about the level of complexity. Okay. Next thing, complex problem solving calls for empirical process control. Okay, so Jim Verquist raised this issue of the more complexity you have, the more agency that is needed. And I'm saying the same thing. I'm calling it empiricism, right? The more empiricism is needed when you get into the complex space. This is hard for executives to get a grip on. So I solve for this by getting them to agree that the project is complex. And then everything else falls like dominoes from there. But if they don't agree it's complex, then our work is done here. Okay, you just stop. This came out at the Give Thanks for Scrum talk. Somebody said, what if you can't get them to agree that it's a complex project? And I said what I just told you, which is then our work is done there and we must move on. And everyone cracked up laughing because they've all been in this situation and they could relate to what the question was suggesting, right? Okay. Third thing, not all experiments are created equal. They need to be adjusted for risk, which is basically the cost. Okay? You need to normalize them for risk. And risk is a very complex topic. I could go on for 3 hours on what risk is. Risk is a possibility of loss, but it has so many components. We can't really go deep on that in this talk, but we did introduce the topic, right? And then lastly, total dollar cost risk is the total cost of finding out you are wrong. How much do we have to spend in time and money to find out if we're right or wrong? That's the total risk size. So there you go. That's the whole show. You know how to contact me. You will get these slides. We can take the remaining time, which is about 12 minutes, or really about 10, because Joe needs to bring us in for a smooth landing at the end. Now we can talk for 10 minutes about all these concepts, and just let me summarize by saying that I show up as a problem solver. I don't use jargon. I try to get some agreements up front about the complexity, and then I can offer a solve subject to certain agreements, and I can get those agreements. Okay, so that's the approach I take. I don't use jargon. I don't use complex diagrams. I get right down to like, let's get some results. But before we do that, let's profile this project. And that clicks with decision makers. It's working for me. And you are going to stick your neck out. Why? Because you have the empirical goods that can actually solve the complex problem. All right, so now let's just open it up to general questions. Feel free to raise your hand or do the virtual hand. Julie, go ahead.
The thing I have the hardest time with is the idea of of the promise that you will deliver progress, and to say, well, how much progress is enough to prove that we're on the right track or the wrong track. That seems, like the definition of done. What's the definition of enough progress?
Well, that could be a conversation where you could actually define the specific KPIs that represent progress in 2 iterations. I would definitely go that way.
I like it.
And don't overcommit, but don't undercommit either. You want to stick your neck out. You have the goods. You want to establish your credibility as someone who can be trusted. As an advisor, right? So if people here are employees, how many people here are employees? Show of hands. Okay, good. Quite a few people. If you're an employee, you're under the authority of your employer. So it's going to be harder for you to be a trusted advisor compared to someone like me who's an external, right? But you can still do it. You establish credibility by bringing a project in using empirical approaches. Hey, guess what? Now people believe you. You are predictable and reliable. You are now capable. You are worthy of trust. Next time there's a problem project, guess who they're coming to for advice? You. So stick your neck out a little bit. Don't be afraid. Have confidence in what we're doing here. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's great. I like your definition of total risk, but I actually think you're lowballing it a lot.
Of course.
Which is there's the opportunity cost, and that's actually usually the bigger cost in something. When you do one thing, you're not able to do another thing.
Yes.
And entire markets go somewhere else. So
yes. Have you read any of Reinerson's work?
No.
Yeah, you would really enjoy his discussions, especially his latest books. Go look him up on Amazon. I think you'll find a lot of really rich material there.
Great, thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. Others who have a question or a comment or an insight or a criticism or a skeptical expression. Go ahead, don't be afraid.
I was just gonna mention, I had my hand up earlier, but I wanted to make sure you got through your slides. The question about self-organization versus self-management. And in my experience, self-organization is a term that scares a lot of executives.
Thank you.
It does. The idea of what, we're just gonna let people do whatever they want, because that's what they think. They don't understand what that means. But when I have a conversation about team self-management, usually the first question that comes back to me is, well, what are you saying? I don't need managers anymore? Because I've heard that with Agile, you don't need managers anymore. And I said, no, it's not that you don't need managers anymore, but we need to have a conversation about transitioning our managers to leaders. And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And so I found that using term self-management gets us to a very pertinent discussion that needs to happen almost immediately when you're talking about implementing any sort of Agile within your organization. Is what do we do with the managers? How do we utilize them? How does their role change? How does their role have to change? If you don't have that discussion up front and you don't come up to some sort of agreement, I have found that everything else gets squashed on the vine pretty quickly.
Right. So let's talk about this briefly for a moment and then tell people what not to do. Okay. First of all, if there's going to be real change, the change is going to manifest as a change in the way decisions get made and who makes them, about what and about how. Okay. So when decision making changes, some people's identity are being threatened at work. Normally, before you push to the edge of the group and then out the door, your decision-making authority is diminished. And this is part of what happens in the process of being nudged out of a company. So as soon as my decision-making authority goes down, all kinds of red lights are flashing red, 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 and I'm being triggered. Okay? So that said, let's go back. The topic, Joe, everything you said is true, but we can't really totally address it here. But I want to say one thing. If you talk about self-organization and then you use a picture like this, you can expect to be shown the door because the customer is just going to turn off. You're going to go self-organization, blah, blah, self-organization, organization, blah, blah, murmuration, blah, 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 fish and birds, blah, blah. Wrong. You're gone. What happens is they have their finger over the eject button, and as soon as you say murmuration, they press it and you go flying out, out the window. So self-management of what? Decisions about what and how.
Yeah, and what I do, Dan, is I like to use 3 of the patterns in the open leadership diagram. The 3 patterns that I use a lot are 1, clarity of authorization. Let's have a conversation about who is authorized to do what. Explicit agreement. Let's agree on this authorization approach, and then boundary management. Now we're going to have to make sure that once we have the authorization and we agree on it, we're going to have to manage that and make sure that, because people, especially early on, are going to step on each other because they're just used to old habits.
Right. Right. So this is another talk that we can do at another time. But these patterns support this basic strategy. Okay. But without clarity of authorization, explicit agreements, and then management of those boundaries, you got nothing at all. Scrum helps with those. Scrum is a kind of training wheels. I like to use an inspired by Scrum approach and then introduce the larger ideas about agility as we go along. But Scrum is the beginning or origin of good, effective agility, because it has the boundary management built in, assuming we get the agreements up front, Joe, like you said.
Yeah.
So there's that. So does anyone else have a comment or a concern? We're 3 minutes from finishing, so we probably have 1 minute more for Q&A, and then Joe's gonna bring us in for a smooth landing, right?
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick and just say that I totally agree with, you've got to use the right language. And that's one of the things I love about this presentation, Daniel, is that you use the wrong language and you turn everybody off. No matter how much you love complexity theory and self-organizing teams and self-managing teams, anyone who comes across, Gary Hamel's famous HBR article, first let's fire all the managers,
Yeah.
it scares people away for some reason. So
Yes, it does.
I do think you need to use the right language. I've personally found swarm intelligence, not with not with the sparrows thing, but actually just kind of showing how you've got kind of 2 things going on at the same time. You've got the top-down stuff, and you've also got the bottom-up stuff. If you can get those going together, you don't have to destroy bureaucracy or anything else. So I don't know if anyone has any experience with kind of using swarm intelligence, but I'm finding that just seems to really click with people and they get it very fast. So
Yeah, there are many ways to label swarm intelligence, virtual teams. There are many flavors of it. The point that I want to make is, over the last year, there have been a lot of content produced on multilingual leadership. And when I say multilingual leadership, they don't mean leader who speaks multiple people languages. It's the necessity for the leader to be able to speak to different consumers of the information, different group, in the language that they relate to. So
Right.
when I'm talking to my architecture team or development team, we're talking in very different terms and even bringing up very different topics than when we're talking to executives or the Federal Reserve regulators.